Shanghai was louder than Josefina expected. Even from inside the taxi, she could hear the city's heartbeat. Bikes zipping by, car horns layered like percussion, and the distant echo of a street violinist playing something mournful yet oddly sweet. Josefina Bennett shifted in her seat, her thighs sticking to the leather in the summer heat. She fanned herself with the printed itinerary of her now ruined culinary fellowship. First day and already a disaster, she muttered to herself. The fire hadn't been her fault, at least not directly. A faulty stovetop at the student housing kitchen had gone up in smoke before she'd even finished unpacking her spices. Now, the program was delayed for weeks, and most of the other fellows had been reassigned. Except her. She gripped the handles of her luggage as the taxi stopped outside a tall, sleek building of glass and jade stone. The Red Pine Boutique Hotel. Elegant, minimalist, cold. "Are you sure this is the right place?" she asked the driver, her brows furrowing. "I was supposed to go to the staff dorms." He pointed to the email on her phone. "Kitchen staff. Hotel. This is it." Josefina sighed, pulling out her red apron and wrapping it around her waist like armor. "Okay, Shanghai, let's do this." The moment she stepped into the kitchen, she knew she didn't belong. It was pristine, surgical, silver gleamed. People moved like choreography. No laughter, no soul, just precision. Josefina's curls were already beginning to frizz from the humidity, and her curves bumped into counters not meant for bodies like hers. She adjusted her apron and held her head high. A man in a white chef's jacket eyed her. "You're late," he said in Mandarin. She blinked. I'm here to help. They said you needed a temporary chef. Josefina Bennett." He muttered something under his breath and gestured toward the soup station. "Finish this. VIP guest arriving in 10. Josefina rolled up her sleeves. Her hands moved with confidence as she adjusted the seasoning, tasted, and then added a touch of ginger and coconut milk. Caribbean warmth meeting Shanghainese elegance. But as she turned, ladle in hand, the kitchen doors burst open and everything slowed. He looked like winter in human form. Liang Wei was tall, impeccably dressed in a gray suit with an open collar. His presence silenced the kitchen. His sharp eyes scanned the room with the coolness of a glacier. Josefina didn't know who he was, only that he was important. And then, as fate would have it, she turned too quickly. Soup, ladle, trajectory, gravity, collision. A stream of steaming ginger coconut broth flew through the air, landing squarely on the chest of Liang Wei's pressed shirt. Gasps echoed like dropped plates. Josefina froze, ladle still in hand, her eyes wide in horror. "Oh my God!" She rushed forward, grabbing a towel. But Liang Wei stepped back, eyes narrowing, voice icy. "Stop." He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His voice was like a scalpel, cold, precise, cutting deep. "You've been here less than an hour," he said, looking at her like she was a smudge on glass, "and already proving your incompetence." Josefina's cheeks burned, not from shame, but from fury. She dropped the towel. "I didn't mean to," she began. "And yet," he said flatly, "you did." There was silence. All eyes on her. She could have apologized. Most would have. But Josefina was not most. She straightened, meeting his cold gaze with fire in her own. "I serve flavor, not apologies." Liang Wei's brow ticked upward. It was the first time anyone had ever dared speak to him that way, especially in front of his staff. "Excuse me?" he said, voice low. "You heard me," she replied, lifting her chin. "You want robotic perfection? Maybe you should eat from a vending machine. But if you want food that actually means something, food with heart, you'll have to risk a little mess." The chef next to her looked like he might faint. Liang Wei stared at her. He didn't respond, didn't blink, didn't move. Then, just as tension choked the air, he turned on his heel. "Let her stay," he said coolly over his shoulder. "She'll either burn the place down or serve something worth remembering." And with that, he disappeared through the doors. Later, that night, Josefina sat alone on the back steps of the hotel kitchen, sipping water from a paper cup. The stars were hidden behind the city lights, but she looked up anyway. "You really did it now, Jose," she muttered, a half laugh, half groan escaping her. But somewhere inside, past the nerves and the jet lag, something fluttered, because she hadn't backed down, because she had tasted the fear and answered with spice. And even though she didn't know his name yet, something told her that icy man in suit, he'd be back. The soup stain had long been dry, but Wei could still feel the warmth of it, ghost-like, stubborn, as though her defiance had been poured directly onto his skin and not just his shirt. "She's not your type," murmured his assistant Feng as they stepped into the elevator. Wei didn't look up from the tablet in his hand. "I didn't ask for your opinion." Feng hesitated. "But it is my job to advise you." The elevator chimed. Floor 42. Executive offices. Polished silence. Wu finally lifted his eyes, that same unreadable calm hiding storms beneath the surface. "And what is your advice, then?" Feng exhaled slowly. "Fire her. Politely, of course. She's a wild card. Your reputation, this brand. You can't afford impulsive staff, no matter how interesting they are." Wei's gaze drifted, just for a second, toward the hotel's internal camera feed. One screen showed the staff dining lounge, where Josefina, curly hair tied up, sleeves rolled, was laughing as she passed out bowls of stew she'd made on her own initiative. The staff leaned in, smiled, ate. No one smiled like that in this hotel. Wei looked away. "She stays," he said. Josefina wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just needed to cook, to do something that made sense in a place where nothing else did. So she brought out her grandmother's recipes: plantain stew with red beans, spiced rice, pan-fried dumplings with jerk-marinated mushrooms. The staff had been cautious at first, but one bite in, and the silence broke. "Miss Bennett," the pastry chef said with his mouth full, "what did you do to this tofu?" Josefina chuckled. "Loved it." They laughed. From the balcony that overlooked the kitchen floor, Wei stood, hands in his pockets. "She shouldn't fit here," he murmured to himself. And yet, his mind kept circling back to her voice, her words. "I serve flavor, not apologies." There was something in the way she stood in that kitchen, as if she belonged, even though every wall seemed designed to reject her. He turned away, jaw tight. This wasn't what he needed. She wasn't what he needed. He'd made that mistake once before. It was 2 years ago. The rain had painted the Shanghai skyline silver, the night he'd proposed to Maylene, the daughter of his father's oldest friend, the match everyone had expected. She had worn red. He had worn hope. "Wei," she whispered as he slipped the ring on her finger. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more certain." Lies, both of them. Because deep down, he'd known she didn't love him. Not really. She loved the name, the weight, the empire. And still, he wanted to believe. He found out on the morning of their wedding that she had already registered marriage to his younger brother, secretly, weeks before. A legal betrayal, a public one. The headlines tore him apart, so he rebuilt himself in silence, with ice, with distance. Never again. Liang Rui was a whirlwind of soft scarves, loud laughter, and disarming honesty. Wei's youngest sibling, and the only person who could enter his office uninvited. She did so now, bursting in mid-lunch with a scarf half falling from her shoulder. "Wei," she sang, "you've been hiding something delicious from me." He glanced up. "I'm working." "You're always working. But one of your chefs, Josefina, she made staff lunch today. Do you know how long it's been since I tasted joy in food here?" "She's not supposed to make unscheduled meals." Rui rolled her eyes. "God, you're impossible." Then, "I want to meet her. Properly. Will you introduce us?" Wei stared at her. "You're the vice director of marketing. You introduce yourself." But Rui had already turned, grinning. "Then I will." "Excuse me," said a voice as Josefina was wiping down the prep table. She turned to see a petite, stylish woman in wide-legged trousers and a silk top that shimmered like water. "I'm Liang Rui, marketing department, and you must be the woman who spiced my lunch into actual life." Josefina laughed, extending a hand. "Josefina Bennett, unofficial kitchen chaos creator." "I like you already," Rui beamed. "Have dinner with me." Josefina blinked. "What?" "Tonight? My treat. Don't worry, I'm not trying to poach you. I just want to talk. You're the most interesting thing to walk into this hotel in years." Josefina hesitated. "Are you always this forward?" Rui winked. "Only when something smells good." Later, that night, from afar, Wei watched from the bar window as Josefina and Rui walked past, laughing, arms linked. Something stirred in him, unsettling, dangerous. "Sir?" Feng asked behind him. "Should I call the board for tomorrow's quarterly prep?" Wei didn't answer immediately. "She's not my type," he said at last, voice barely audible. But he was lying to himself. He could still taste her spices on the wind. And for the first time in years, Liang Wei was beginning to forget the cold. The banquet hall of the Red Pine Hotel was a crown jewel. Floor-to-ceiling windows, golden uplighting, tables dressed in crisp ivory silk, and a view of the city skyline that made even billionaires pause. Tonight was the annual Investors Gala, where every dish had been curated months in advance, the guests selected with surgical precision. But no one had planned for the head chef to collapse an hour before service with acute food poisoning. "Sir, we have a situation," Feng said, rushing into Wei's office with urgency in his step and panic in his eyes. Wei looked up, calm as stone. "Then solve it." "The executive chef is unconscious in the staff clinic. Half the menu isn't even plated yet. The appetizers aren't prepped. The sous chefs are stalling, and the media's arriving in 30. Wei stood slowly. "Who's leading the kitchen?" Feng hesitated. "Josefina." Josefina hadn't planned to step into a battlefield today. But when chaos broke loose, she tied her curls up in a silk scarf, pulled on her red apron, and stepped in like a general preparing for war. "Okay, people," she clapped. "No one's dying on my watch. Let's work with what we've got." She scanned the walk-in fridge, heart racing, mind flying. There wasn't enough Wagyu left. The delicate pastry shells were unfinished. The plating team was 2 people short. But there were king mushrooms, star anise, fresh scallions, rice noodles, sesame oil, lotus root. "Let's do this the way Grandma taught me." "New plan," she announced. "We're doing fusion, Shanghai Caribbean appetizers. Think flavor bombs, think heart. Let's hit 'em where they chew." The staff hesitated for only a second, then followed. Wei entered the kitchen, eyes sharp, expecting disaster. What he found instead was order. Not his kind of order, but something better. Josefina stood in the center of it all, directing, tasting, plating, her voice steady, her movements graceful despite the sweat beading on her temple. She tossed a garnish of citrus zest over lotus root tempura with one hand, wiped down a tray with the other. Her red apron was stained. Her curls had escaped. Her body moved with purpose and command. "She's improvising," Feng whispered beside him. Wei said nothing, but his chest burned, and not from anger. An hour later, the ballroom shimmered with candlelight. Guests took their first bites. Silence, then murmurs, then hums of surprise, then laughter and compliments. "This spice," someone whispered. "Unexpected." "Brilliant," another said. "Is that jerk soy glaze?" The crisis had turned into praise. And for the first time that night, Liang Wei did not own the room. She did. Back in the hallway outside the kitchen, Josefina leaned against the wall, chest rising and falling, hands trembling now that it was all over. She looked up. Wei was watching her. She pushed off the wall and walked toward him, not waiting for an invitation. "Don't say it," she muttered. "Not unless it starts with thank and ends with you." He tilted his head. "That wasn't the planned menu." "No," she replied, "but your menu was about elegance. Mine was about survival." There was silence, heavy, electric. Then Josefina crossed her arms. "You know, you're exhausting," she said. Wei blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "You act like vulnerability is a disease, like smiling might collapse your empire, like people are beneath you unless they speak in cold, polished sentences." He didn't respond, but his jaw flexed. Josefina took a breath. "But I'm not afraid of you. I'm not impressed by wealth. I'm not intimidated by that empty look you wear like a crown. So stop staring at me like I'm a problem you haven't figured out how to fire yet." Wei met her gaze, cool but shaken. "I wasn't going to fire you," he said. "Oh? Because I improvised?" "No," he murmured. "Because you cared more about the food than the fear. That's rare." His voice softened just slightly. "You were brilliant tonight." Josefina blinked. "Thanks," she said slowly, unsure how to hold kindness from a man who usually wielded silence like a sword. Then, unexpectedly, he added, "You had flour on your cheek the entire banquet." She blushed, instinctively wiping her face. He walked away, without another word, but his eyes lingered just a second too long before they did. Later that night, in the quiet warmth of the hotel's courtyard, Josefina sat beneath a red lantern, her feet sore and her back aching in that satisfying way that only comes after a fight well won. Liang Rui approached, 2 cups of ginger tea in hand. "You were magnificent," she said, handing one to Josefina. "I think you scared my brother." Josefina laughed. "He's scary all on his own." "True," Rui nodded. Then she added gently, "But he watched you like a man remembering what flavor is." Josefina raised an eyebrow. "Are you matchmaking right now?" "Nope," Rui grinned. "I'm inviting you." "To what?" "My family's New Year dinner. We host it at our lakeside home. You'll cook something small, help the staff, be around, casual." Josefina hesitated. "Your family doesn't even know me." "But I do," Rui said. "And my gut. It says you're exactly the breath of warm air this family needs." Josefina smiled. "All right then," she whispered. "Let's shake up their traditions." The guest suite was silent, save for the quiet hum of the air conditioner. Afternoon sun filtered through the sheer curtains, painting soft patterns on the floor like forgotten lace. Josefina stood in the center of the room, her hands still slightly dusted with flour, her apron slung over her shoulder. She had come up to deliver a custom dessert tray for a high-end guest, a favor Liang Rui had requested last minute. But the suite was empty. No guest, no assistant. Just a note on the table. "Leave it on the desk. Thank you. Assistant to Mr. Liang Wei." She stepped into the adjoining office, a private executive workspace built into the suite. Everything was minimal, pristine, cold like its owner. Mahogany desk, silver-plated pen, a framed art print of a single ginkgo leaf. She placed the dessert tray gently onto the glass. Just as she turned to go, a soft breeze from the air vent knocked open the top drawer. Just an inch. She froze. It wasn't her business, but a flicker of movement. Color, maybe, caught her eye. Her fingers hesitated. Then, softly, she pulled the drawer open. Inside were only two things: a jade prayer bead bracelet and a photograph. It was slightly faded, edges worn from being touched too many times. Liang Wei stood in the photo, younger, suit perfectly pressed. Beside him was a woman, Chinese, beautiful, radiant. Her hand on his chest, his arm resting lightly around her waist. They weren't smiling, but they didn't need to. The intimacy was in the posture. Josefina stared, throat tightening. She put the drawer back exactly as she'd found it. When she turned, Wei stood in the doorway. "I wasn't," Josefina started, guilt and embarrassment hitting her all at once. "I know," he said, his voice unreadable. There was a long silence. He walked past her, slowly, and slid the drawer shut himself. "You shouldn't have seen that," he said. Josefina nodded once. "I didn't mean to pry." His jaw tensed. "It's not about privacy. It's about memory." She met his eyes. She mattered. "Yes," he said simply. "Once." "And now?" she asked quietly. Wei hesitated. "Now," he murmured, "I keep the photo to remind myself not to trust softness." Josefina didn't respond. There were too many words trapped in her throat. She gave a small nod, then left without another word. The banquet that night was smaller, a curated dinner for a few international investors. Josefina was asked to assist with plating again, her food now gaining whispers of praise in elite corners. She wasn't supposed to be seen by guests, but one of them, a white European hotel investor with too many rings and not enough manners, caught sight of her adjusting a garnish on the pass-through counter. He blinked, then leaned toward Wei, whispering in accented Mandarin, "She's the chef? Huh. I assumed your kitchens were tighter run. She doesn't exactly fit the brand image. A bit loud, a bit round. But I suppose you're trying diversity now, eh?" Wei didn't speak immediately. Josefina, unfortunately, heard every word. The air in the kitchen turned to ice. Josefina's hand stilled on the plate, her back straightened, slow and precise, as she lifted her chin, but said nothing. She would not cry, not here, not for them. But then, Wei stood. He didn't yell, but his words were razor sharp. "Mr. Henriksen," he said in fluent English, "if your appetite depends on the weight or race of the hands that cook for you, I suggest you check into a different hotel, one that matches your limited palate." The entire kitchen fell silent. Henriksen gaped. Wei continued calmly. "Miss Bennett has been the only reason this kitchen hasn't collapsed in the last 3 days. If you want to insult someone, insult me. But leave her name out of your mouth, or find your own damn seasoning." Henriksen turned red, but he didn't argue. Wei turned back to Josefina. Their eyes met. He didn't apologize. But for the first time, she didn't need him to. Later that night, Josefina sat alone in her suite, the red lanterns glowing outside her window like distant heartbeats. She didn't cry often. She didn't allow herself the space, but tonight she did. Quietly, softly, not because of what was said, but because of what it meant. How easily the world still tried to make her small. How quickly her joy could be reduced to a joke. How hard she had to work to just exist in rooms that were built to erase her. She wiped her face, breathed deep, pulled her knees to her chest. "You're not made for them, girl," She could almost hear her grandmother say, "You're made for the ones who see your glory and don't flinch." Upstairs, in his office, Liang Wei stood at the window watching the courtyard below. The staff had all gone home. The city was humming in distant echoes, but in the window across from him, he saw her light still on, a shadow curled by the couch. She didn't know she was visible from where he stood, and yet, she cried like someone who had learned how to hide it. He leaned one hand against the glass, and for the first time in a long time, Liang Wei felt something burn in his chest that had nothing to do with shame or memory. It was longing, and something dangerously close to regret. The hotel's private chef had called in sick, again. Liang Rui rolled her eyes and peeked into the smaller kitchen usually reserved for the executive wing. She was supposed to host a private lunch for a visiting philanthropist from Singapore, and now, no chef. But there was Josefina, humming softly to herself. The Caribbean rhythms in her voice carried across the tiled floor, just loud enough to pierce Rui's stress. Josefina had tied her curls up with a crimson scarf today, her gold hoops catching the kitchen light as she stirred something fragrant and deeply nostalgic. Coconut milk simmered beside roasted ginger and garlic, and tender eggplants caramelized slowly in a cast iron pot. Rui blinked. "What are you cooking?" Josefina smiled without turning. "My grandma called it fire-roasted heart stew. Eggplant, chickpeas, roasted tomatoes, caramelized onions, and a little coconut milk. Spices like memory, not like heat." Rui tilted her head. "You just made that up." Josefina grinned. "Only the name." Liang Wei had only walked into the kitchen for coffee. He was halfway through checking quarterly projections when the smell stopped him mid-step. He couldn't place it, not entirely, but it was familiar. Something warm, something soft. It tugged at a door he hadn't opened in years. Without a word, he set his phone down and sat at the corner table. Josefina didn't react. She simply ladled a small portion into a porcelain bowl and placed it before him. "Hungry?" she asked. "I didn't ask for anything." "Didn't say you had to." Wei stared at her, but her eyes weren't challenging, just open. So without a word, he picked up the spoon and tasted. The first mouthful burned, not with spice, but with memory. Many years ago, she used to cook like this. His mother, gentle, always in linen, whose voice had been a whisper in a house of noise and power. She made eggplant stew when he was sick, chickpeas when he won awards, coconut milk whenever the weather turned cold. And the day she died, she had been cooking too. A quiet act of love before silence took her forever. Wei swallowed, but the lump in his throat didn't move. He set the spoon down. Josefina didn't ask, but she sat across from him anyway. "She used to make that," he said, voice low, eyes unfocused. "Not the way you do, but close. Coconut milk, charred eggplant, ginger. She didn't follow recipes, just listen to the vegetables." Josefina smiled softly. "My grandma said vegetables talk to women with secrets." Wei gave a short, broken laugh. "My mother died before I could learn her language." Josefina didn't say "I'm sorry." She didn't offer a cliche. She just leaned forward and asked, what did her kitchen sound like? Wei paused. Quiet, but not empty. Like every sound had a purpose. Her pots never clanged. Her footsteps never echoed. Josefina nodded, eyes soft. "That's love, you know, when even silence holds you." He blinked, and for a moment, just a moment, Wei forgot to be cold. From that day on, he watched her more often. Not obviously, not directly. But whenever she walked into a room, something shifted. His meetings felt more bearable, his emails less urgent, the weight on his chest less crushing. He noticed how she smiled at the cleaning staff, how she gave the concierge a small container of stew when his mother was in the hospital, how she laughed at her own jokes, even when no one else caught them. He had spent years staring at spreadsheets, numbers, performance graphs. Now he found himself wondering, when did I stop watching people live? "Come with us," Rui said one evening, flopping onto Josefina's couch with a box of strawberry buns in her hand. Josefina raised an eyebrow. "Come with who?" "My family. Our lakeside home in Xiapu. It's only for the weekend. Casual. Lunar New Year prep and hot pot night. You're practically family already." Josefina chuckled. "Rui, your brother would probably rather eat glass." Rui rolled her eyes. "He's coming too. Not by choice, obviously, but still, it'll be awkward. Fun awkward. You can cook, and he can scowl. It'll be great." Josefina hesitated. "What if they don't like me?" "Too late," Rui grinned. "I already adore you. One vote's enough." The next day, 2 black cars pulled up at the old family estate nestled near the sea. Red lanterns swayed from pine trees. The air was fresh with salt and incense. Josefina had arrived first with Rui, laughing as they carried groceries through the garden path. Her floral scarf danced in the wind, and her sundress hugged her figure like a quiet celebration of softness. She was halfway through slicing lotus root when the sound of car doors clicking caught her attention. She looked up. Liang Wei stepped out, dressed in soft navy, his sleeves rolled, eyes catching hers for just a moment. For once, there was no boardroom between them, just sky and breath and the pull of something inevitable. The sun had long dipped beneath the horizon, but the sea kept whispering. Gentle waves stretched themselves thin across the dark sand, moonlight glazing the surface like silver thread. Red paper lanterns flickered in the distance, their reflection stretching across the water as if reaching for something they'd never touch. Josefina wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The night air at the Xiapu coast was damp and cool, but not unkind. She walked slowly, barefoot now, her heels dangling from 2 fingers. Her toes sank into the soft earth, grounding her in the moment. Behind her, she heard footsteps. She didn't turn. She already knew it was him. Liang Wei walked beside her. Not too close, not too far. Just enough for her to feel the ripple of his silence. They didn't speak at first. The sea did all the talking. Eventually she asked, voice low, "Do you always look like the world owes you something?" He glanced at her. "Maybe it does." Josefina smiled faintly, gaze on the moonlit waves. "Let me guess. You were born with expectations sewn into your name." He didn't answer. She added softly, "You walk like someone who never got to choose the shoes." That made him stop. He looked at her, really looked. "You're not like them," he said quietly. She laughed. "I think that's the point." They kept walking, the ocean drawing long breaths beside them. Wei's voice broke the silence. "My mother died of heart failure," he said suddenly. "At home, alone." Josefina's steps slowed. "I was in Beijing, negotiating an acquisition. My father told me I needed to be there, that the company would fall apart without me. My mother had been asking for me, but I didn't go." Josefina turned toward him, her expression soft. He continued, "When I got the call, it was already over. No warning, no goodbye. Just a voicemail from her phone I never opened." His fingers flexed at his side, but his voice didn't shake. "She was the only person in my life who didn't see me as a future heir or investment. Just her son." Josefina said nothing. She let the ache settle between them. Wei looked back at the sea. "I was supposed to marry someone a few months after. Maylene, my fiancé, the one in the photo." Josefina's eyes darkened. But she didn't interrupt. She told me she loved me, he said. Smiled when I signed the house over in both our names. Planned our wedding with Rui while I worked overtime to pay for it all. He gave a dry laugh. She married my brother the day before our ceremony. In secret. Legally. Behind my back. Josefina inhaled slowly. Your brother? He nodded. It was all orchestrated. Power shift. My father needed to diversify the business holdings. She was the pawn. I was the sacrifice. He paused. I've never believed in love since. Josefina stopped walking. The waves kissed her ankles. She turned to face him fully, hair blowing across her cheek. Wei stood in front of her like a man made of glass, cold, sharp, and cracking under his own reflection. She reached out. Her fingers found his. Just once, just gently. Her skin warm against his winter. Maybe it's not love that hurts, she whispered. Maybe it's the lies they told in its name. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't pull away. Instead, he looked down at their joined hands as though it were the first real thing he'd felt in years. And then, barely audible, he said, I can't remember the last time someone touched me without wanting something in return. Josefina's grip didn't tighten. She just let it be. Software uncomplicated. Real. That's the thing about honest love, she said. You don't owe it anything, but it still shows up. He looked at her, really looked at her, and the weight of the years in his chest didn't lift, but it shifted, because someone was finally standing in the storm with him. They didn't speak much on the walk back. Words weren't necessary. By the time they returned to the house, the lanterns had burned lower, and Rui was already asleep on the couch, a half-eaten mooncake resting on her chest. Josefina paused by her guest room door. Wei stood behind her, hands in his pockets, as if holding something too delicate to say. Good night, Mr. Liang, she said softly. He nodded. But just before she stepped inside, she turned back and added, You don't have to keep holding your breath. He tilted his head. One day, she whispered, you're going to exhale. And when you do, I hope you remember what it feels like to be free. Then she closed the door, and for the first time in years, Liang Wei felt air move through his lungs like forgiveness. Shanghai's skyline glittered like glass, untouchable, unforgiving. Josefina stood in the center of the Red Pine Hotel's rooftop herb garden, her apron dusted with specks of soil and her fingers stained with mint and lemon balm. She was laughing with a staff member from Pastry, her hips swaying lightly to the old reggae tune humming through her earbuds. It was the first real laughter since Xiapu. The wind kissed her cheeks. Somewhere inside her, a hope she hadn't dared name had begun to bloom. Downstairs, in the polished marble lobby, a shadow returned. She walked like elegance incarnate, heels clicking with calculated softness, a cream silk maternity dress flowing around her like a threat disguised in satin. Her left hand rested delicately on her belly. Her right held her designer purse with the subtle flair of someone used to being envied. Meilin Liang, once Meilin Zhang, now the wife of Liang Han, Wei's younger brother. Madame Liang, the receptionist said with a bow, I'm here to speak with Wei. I trust he's not too busy being mysterious. Her smile didn't touch her eyes. Wei didn't look up when Meilin entered his office. You're not on my schedule. Meilin laughed lightly. And here, I thought family didn't need appointments. He finally met her gaze. Cold, measured. What do you want? I was in the area. Han's meeting with real estate developers. I figured I'd stop by and she placed her hand dramatically on her stomach. Share the news. Wei's eyes flickered. He already knew. The family grapevine was always fast when it wanted to gloat. Congratulations, he said flatly. She tilted her head. You don't sound thrilled. I'm sure our child will inherit all the best of both worlds. He said nothing. She moved closer, lowering her voice like velvet over a blade. I've seen the girl, by the way. Wei didn't respond. Maylene's lips curved. Pretty, in an unconventional way. Loud, bold, full of curves, full of opinions, full of spice. Not your usual flavor, is she? Wei's jaw tensed. Meilin went on. She tries hard. You can see it in the way she smiles, like she knows she doesn't belong here but hopes no one notices. She gave a small, pitying laugh. But then again, you were always fond of stray things. We stood, and for the first time in years, he wasn't silent. She's not you, he said. Meilin blinked, and thank God for that. Something sharp flickered in her eyes. She doesn't want power, he said softly. She doesn't hide knives behind compliments. She doesn't wear love like a mask or use it like currency. He stepped closer, his voice firm. She cooks with joy. She speaks with courage. And when she smiles, I remember what it feels like to breathe. Meilin's lips parted, but no sound came. Wei didn't give her a chance to respond. This is my hotel. You've said your piece. Now leave. Meilin turned, wounded pride in every step. But before she reached the door, there was a sound. Josefina stood just around the corner, frozen. She hadn't meant to overhear. She had just been returning a binder Rui left at the front desk when she passed by the open conference wing and heard her name. Every word stuck to her ribs. She's not you, and thank God for that. It was supposed to be a compliment, but it didn't feel like one. She walked away before Wei saw her, back to the kitchen, back to her station, back to a world that kept asking her to prove she belonged in spaces that were never designed with her in mind. Spice, curves, tries too hard, loud. She scrubbed her hands too long at the sink. The staff around her laughed and worked, unaware of the storm behind her eyes. Later, that evening, Wei stood outside the kitchen corridor, watching through the glass as Josefina stirred a pot with a mechanical rhythm. No music, no humming. The light inside didn't reach her, and for the first time, he wondered if his silence had become part of the world that tried to shrink her. The kitchen was still. It was well past midnight. The noise of the hotel had faded into a hush, the last guest room lights dimming, the staff long gone. Shanghai glittered beyond the windows, golden and silent. In the prep kitchen, the world had shrunk to soft shadows, low lamplight, and the smell of vanilla and cocoa hanging in the air. Josefina stood barefoot on cool tile, her curls tied loosely, apron snug around her waist. Her hands moved slowly, deliberately, measuring, folding, pouring. A cake, not for a client, not for a staff event, just for him. She had overheard Rui earlier that morning while making jasmine rice. He never celebrates, Rui had sighed. Not since she died, not even with us. No dinners, no candles, no gifts. Like his life didn't begin or continue, just exists. Josefina hadn't asked who she was. She already knew. Still, something about that haunted her. How someone could survive so long in a life without softness. So she baked dark chocolate ganache, black tea syrup, hints of orange peel in the frosting, layers rich enough to hold memories, subtle enough not to beg for attention. She placed a single candle in the center. No singing, no party, just a cake and silence. I didn't ask for that. The voice startled her. Deep, calm, familiar. Josefina turned to find Liang Wei standing just inside the doorway, half-shadowed, no jacket, sleeves rolled, shirt wrinkled like he'd been walking through the city restlessly, or maybe pacing the floor of his thoughts. Her heart skipped, but she held his gaze. "I know," she said, "but sometimes the heart needs things the ego didn't order." He stepped closer, slowly. "I don't do birthdays." "I don't do people who pretend they don't bleed," she replied softly, lighting the candle with a match. The flame flickered between them. He stared at it, then at her, then the cake. "What's in it?" "Bittersweet chocolate, burnt sugar, orange peel, black tea. Some things that taste better after they've survived the heat." Wei's throat worked as he swallowed. "Like people?" "Exactly." She reached forward gently, brushing something from his sleeve. "You look tired," she murmured. "I haven't slept in days," he admitted. "Why?" He paused. His voice dropped. "You." The air between them tightened. He was standing too close now. Or maybe she had stepped forward. It didn't matter. The space between them was gone. Her fingers still rested on his arm. His gaze fell to her lips. Her breath caught. "Don't," she whispered. He didn't ask why. He leaned forward anyway, just slightly, just enough for his forehead to rest gently against hers. Not a kiss, just heat, breath, proximity. His hands didn't touch her, but his soul felt like it did. "I haven't wanted to feel anything in years," he murmured. "Then you came, and I started tasting everything again." Josefina closed her eyes. "And I haven't let anyone in for years. But you look at me like I'm not just spice or decoration, like I'm real." His lips were inches from hers. The candle between them sputtered. And then the door creaked. "Josefina!" Rui's voice called from down the hall. "You still in here?" They froze. Wei stepped back. Josefina exhaled shakily, heart hammering. "I'm in here," she called, voice carefully steady. Rui entered a second later, yawning and rubbing her eyes. "Oof, smells amazing. Who's the lucky guest?" Neither of them spoke. Then Josefina smiled and gestured to the cake. "Just someone who forgot how to celebrate." Later, after Rui had gone and the candle had melted halfway down, Josefina walked over to Wei as he stood quietly by the window. She handed him a small plate with a single slice. He didn't take it right away. "I didn't think anyone would remember." "I didn't remember," she said gently. "I chose to care." He looked at her again. This woman who kept showing up, not to save him, not to pity him, but simply to see him. She stepped closer, lifted the edge of the plate to nudge him into holding it. Then, softly, warmly, she whispered, "Happy birthday, Liang Wei." He didn't speak, didn't move for a long time, just stood there, watching the slice in his hands like it might disappear if he blinked. That night, Wei lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The slice of cake sat untouched on his nightstand. The candle had burned out hours ago, but the taste of her presence lingered like cinnamon on air. His phone buzzed. A message from Rui. "What happened tonight? You and Josefina were glowing like lanterns." He didn't answer. Instead, he closed his eyes and whispered her name. Not like a man obsessed, but like a man finally waking from hibernation. The hotel buzzed with quiet elegance. From the outside, nothing had changed. Dishes were plated. Guests smiled. Rooms were turned down in perfect rhythm. But inside Josefina, everything was shifting. She stared at the email on Rui's laptop screen. Her hands shook as she hovered the cursor above the digital folder marked Chef Recruitment. Internal notes. She hadn't meant to snoop. Rui had asked her to upload some new event photos while she ran to a meeting. It was supposed to be quick, easy, routine. But curiosity, like hunger, often started as a whisper, and now she couldn't unsee it. The file, applicant, Josefina Bennett. Status, Referred by owner's executive order. Note: recruited upon request by Mr. Liang Wei following prior interest. Reason: personal referral. Chef's family culinary background. Josefina's heart dropped. She scrolled further. Attached was a scanned document. An old photo. A young Wei, standing beneath a palm tree on a beach in St. Lucia, holding a styrofoam takeout container. Behind him, a handwritten sign that read, Miss Delphine's Fire Kitchen. Her grandmother's food stand. The timestamp was from 7 years ago. Josefina found him in the hotel's private library, flipping through renovation blueprints. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside. Wei looked up, immediately sensing the fire in her voice. He set the tablet down. "What's wrong?" She held out the printed page. His face didn't change. "You knew," she said, voice low, "before I ever stepped into this hotel. You asked for me." He nodded. "Yes." Her throat tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" Wei stood, slowly. "Because I didn't think it mattered." Her eyes flared. "Didn't matter? You recruited me like some secret project and never thought I deserved to know?" "I didn't recruit you," he said softly. "I remembered you." She blinked. He took a step closer. 7 years ago, I was in St. Lucia, alone, angry, grieving. I didn't speak to anyone for days, until I met your grandmother. He paused. She served me a plate of curry fish and coconut bread. Told me I looked like a man who needed to remember life could still be sweet. Then she told me about you. Josefina's breath caught. You were in New York then. Culinary school. She spoke about you like you were light bottled in spice jars. That day was the first time in years I felt warmth. His voice cracked slightly. When I saw your name on the fellowship list this year, I recognized it. And when the program fell apart, I pulled strings. He looked her in the eye. Because I wanted to meet the woman your grandmother believed could flavor the world. Josefina stared at him, the room swimming. You don't get to say that, she whispered. You don't get to spin this like some fairy tale. I never meant to manipulate you. But you did, she snapped. You let me believe I earned this on my own, that I belonged here without favors. You do belong here, he said, voice rising for the first time. Your food, your fire, your heart. This place is better because of you. But it wasn't real, she said, trembling. It started as a secret. He took another step. Josefina. No. She backed away, shaking her head. You should have told me the truth from the start. I would have respected that. But you watched me fight to prove myself, to fit into your cold world, while you sat with the power to make it easier, and stayed silent. Her voice broke. Do you have any idea how it feels to finally think you've been seen, only to realize it was because someone already knew you? Wei said nothing, because for the first time since she walked into his life, he didn't have words sharp enough to cut through the pain he caused. Josefina turned toward the door, and just before she left, she said the one thing that shattered him. I trusted the way you looked at me, Liang Wei, and I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for that. Then she was gone. Wei stood in the quiet, her absence louder than her voice. He reached for the photo on the desk, him on that beach, her grandmother in the background, smiling like she could see his whole life before it happened. I didn't want to control you, he whispered. I just wanted to find my way back to warmth. But warmth doesn't wait in shadows. It walks away when it's not told the truth. The taste of coconut and cocoa still haunted his mouth, but she was gone. And the silence she left behind was louder than any storm. Liang Wei sat alone in his corner office, the city skyline stretching endlessly beyond the windows. Empty, hollow, meaningless. He hadn't changed his clothes in a day. His inbox overflowed. The board was calling, and he couldn't bring himself to care. Not about the stock prices, not about the new luxury acquisition in Chengdu, not even about the press conference his assistant had reminded him of 3 times, because she wasn't there, and the kitchen didn't hum without her. "Mr. Liang, let's be honest," said Mr. Shen, the oldest board member, crossing his legs slowly. "The optics of your entanglement with the Caribbean chef are beginning to raise questions." "I didn't realize integrity was now considered a PR risk," Wei replied, voice cool but volatile. Another member chimed in. "There are whispers of favoritism, that her position was orchestrated." "Because it was," Shen said. "And if it leaks, the scandal won't just touch you, it'll stain the brand. International investors, partnerships. We can't afford this." Wei leaned forward, eyes burning. "Then let it stain." Silence rippled, but Shen smiled, unbothered. "You were once known for control, Liang Wei, but lately, it seems you've forgotten what it means to lead." Later that day, Rui stormed into the boardroom after the meeting cleared out. "You let them speak about her like that?" she demanded. Wei didn't answer. "I trusted you," she continued. "I told her you were different, that you'd protect her, and instead, you handed her name to the wolves and sat there in silence." "She left before I could fix it," he murmured. "She left because you made her feel small," Rui snapped. "And I swear, Wei, if you let her disappear, you'll regret it longer than you ever mourned Maylene." He flinched at the name. She softened, but only slightly. "Josefina isn't just flavor. She's fire. And if you're not man enough to stand in it, don't you dare ask her to burn for you again." Then she left him there, alone, again. The culinary fellowship restarted quietly 2 weeks later. The kitchen felt different now. Sterile, rigid, restrained. The energy was gone. The air had no rhythm. Josefina stirred her sauces, smiled on cue, answered questions, and gave nothing of herself. Not really. Her hands still moved with magic, but her heart no longer danced with them. She was wiping down her station late one night when she heard the back door of the institute open. Footsteps, slow, familiar. She didn't look up. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "I know," Liang Wei replied. He stood behind her, silent for a moment. Then, "I tried to stay away." She didn't turn around. "Then you should have tried harder. I wanted to respect your space." "You don't get to respect me now, Wei. You had your chance," he exhaled. "I didn't tell you about your grandmother because I didn't want to own you. I just wanted to be near something that once made me feel alive." Josefina finally turned, eyes bright with hurt. "And you thought silence would make that okay?" "No," he whispered. "I thought silence would protect me from losing something again." Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away. "You can't love people from behind glass, Wei. I don't know how to love any other way." "Then learn," she said. He stepped closer, voice trembling now, the mask cracking. "You taught me how to breathe again, Josefina." She froze. He kept going. "I don't check the stock first thing anymore. I check the weather. I listen to music. I smile. I laugh with Rui. I don't taste food like data anymore. I taste it like memory." His voice broke. "And every night since you left, I keep waiting for the silence to end. But it doesn't." He looked at her, bare and undone. "I don't want to go back to who I was. And I'm begging you, don't disappear." Josefina stepped forward. She didn't cry. She didn't touch him. She simply asked, "Are you here because you miss me? Or because you miss the way I made you feel?" That question hung between them like incense smoke. Wei didn't flinch. "I'm here because I finally realized that healing isn't something I could buy, control, or calculate. It walked into my kitchen, wearing a red apron and laughter in her eyes. A long pause. Then Josefina whispered, "I don't need saving." "I know. I'm not going to build a life where I have to fight for my dignity every day." "I won't ask you to." She stared at him, saw the cracks, and, for the first time, saw truth behind his eyes instead of power. "I don't forgive you," she said, "but I believe you." The article hit the internet like a knife. Mystery chef with a scandalous past. Who is the woman behind Liang Wei's sudden transformation? Josefina's face was splashed across half a dozen digital outlets by morning. Her full name, her Caribbean background, photos from a community protest she once led in Harlem, a mention of her student loan struggles, a twisted retelling of how she lost a restaurant apprenticeship in Paris years ago after speaking out against racial bias in the kitchen. But the headline that hurt the most? Sleeping her way to the penthouse kitchen? By noon, hashtags began trending. Hashtag spice scandal. Hashtag red apron reputation. Hashtag chef or climber. The comment sections were poison. Figures. She doesn't look like a professional chef. Women like her always find a way in. Josefina sat in the hotel's staff hallway, her hands numb around her phone. Her stomach twisted as each word pierced deeper. She hadn't cried yet, not yet, but the ache was heavy, not because it wasn't new, but because it was expected, and that's what hurt the most. She locked her phone and stood up. Melin sat in her spa suite, silk robe fluttering as she watched the scandal unfold with a cup of rose tea in hand. Not personal, she said to herself, just strategic. She hadn't expected it to go this viral, but the more Josefina's name fell from lips that once worshipped Liang Wei's control, the better, because it wasn't enough that Melin had won the title of wife. She had to own the legacy too, and if that meant dismantling the woman who made Wei feel again, so be it. Rui slammed the article down on Wei's desk. "She's bleeding, and you're still sitting in here like a ghost?" Wei scanned the headline, jaw tightening, breath still. "It was Melin," Rui snapped. "I confirmed it. She paid off someone in media to investigate Josefina's life." She handed them the photos, the angle, the language. Wei's silence was thunderous. "She's humiliated, Wei. Josefina was humiliated in front of the entire industry because of you." "I know." "No, you don't," Rui shouted. "You can't just show up late at night whispering apologies and then vanish in the morning. This is your mess." Wei stood, eyes blazing, shoulders squared. "No," he said, voice low. "This is our war now." The shareholder room was lined with floor-length windows and men in suits. The scandal was already being discussed when Wei walked in. No assistant, no entourage, just him. One board member leaned forward. "Liang Wei, we need immediate damage control, legal distancing, a formal statement." "Won't be necessary," Wei interrupted. He stepped forward. "I called this meeting to clarify something." All eyes turned. Wei's voice was steady, fierce. "There has been speculation, accusation, that Josefina Bennett earned her position in this company through personal persuasion." The room murmured. He continued, "I want to be perfectly clear. Josefina didn't need my name to shine." He looked around the room, gaze sharp as steel. "I needed her to feel alive." Silence. He let it hang there. Truth. Unvarnished. "I was rotting in my own empire, trapped in ghosts. Her food didn't just warm stomachs. It woke something in people. Something in me. She didn't seduce me. She saved me." One board member coughed. "You're asking us to support a scandal." "No," Wei said. "I'm asking you to support truth. And if you'd rather protect shareholders than stand by the people who breathe life into this company, then I'll happily walk today." A gasp, a murmur. panic rising, but Wei didn't flinch. That night, Liang Wei stood before the press, cameras flashing, reporters shouting, and he spoke, not from behind a script, but from behind a heart finally uncovered. I fell in love with a woman who challenged me, who fed me before I remembered I was hungry, who never asked for my name to build her legacy. She was already building her own. And in one final blow to the past, he added, "She is not a scandal, she is a standard." She stood in her tiny apartment kitchen, hands trembling around a chipped mug as the press conference streamed on her laptop. He looked tired, but honest, not composed, but convicted. And when he said, "I needed her to feel alive," her breath caught, because in that moment, she believed him. The ticket was tucked in her passport. Her suitcase sat by the door of her apartment. A jar of handmade spice mix, Grandma's blend, was sealed tightly in her backpack. Josefina was going home, not in defeat, not in disgrace, but in survival. Still, something about the silence of Shanghai on her last night felt different. The city no longer looked like a storm she'd survived, but like a lover she once dared to touch. It came folded on paper, slipped under her door. Tonight, one last meal. Rooftop, no titles, just us. Wei. Josefina stared at it for a long time. Her first instinct was to ignore it. But the way her heart stuttered, that didn't feel like something she could fake. The rooftop garden of the Red Pine Hotel had been transformed. Lanterns swayed from bamboo poles, casting ruby light over the table set for two. There were no reporters, no cameras, no board members, just Wei. He stood at the edge of the rooftop, watching the skyline shimmer like glass teardrops. Josefina stepped into the light. She wore deep red silk. Her curls were loose, her face unreadable. Wei turned when he heard her. For a moment, neither spoke. He gestured to the table. "I cooked." She raised an eyebrow. "You?" "Fine, I supervised," he smirked, "but I tasted every dish. Risky. I'm desperate." Her lips curved just slightly. They sat. The meal was simple. Grilled fish, ginger rice, sweet potato curry, and red bean cake. Every flavor told a story, hers and his. They ate slowly, in silence, until the last plate was cleared. Then Wei stood, and so did she. Lanterns swayed above them, light catching in her earrings, brushing her cheek like fire. Wei exhaled, his voice low. "I loved wrong once." Josefina's eyes lifted to his. He stepped closer. "I loved her out of duty, out of fear, out of emptiness. And when she left me, I thought I'd never feel again, that I didn't deserve to." Her lip trembled. "But then you showed up in red and spilled soup on my soul." She laughed, barely, a sound too fragile to finish. Wei went on. "You didn't just wake me up, Josefina. You made me want to wake up. You made silence unbearable." A pause, then softer. "But this time, it's real." He stepped forward. "It's you." For a second, the air stopped moving. The lantern stopped swaying. Even the city seemed to hold its breath. Josefina didn't speak. She just looked at him, at all of him. The man who was once winter, now ablaze. She lifted a hand, touched his chest, felt the heartbeat beneath it, then whispered, "I've been waiting for you to say that." He leaned in slowly, reverently. No rush, just reverence. And when their lips met, it wasn't fire. It wasn't thunder. It was the quiet ache of belonging, pressed together under the softest sky. A kiss that didn't ask for permission. only forgiveness. Somewhere in the city, Lunar New Year celebrations ignited. Fireworks burst into bloom across the skyline. Red, gold, violet. Lanterns glowed brighter. And as they kissed again beneath the lights, the wind wrapped around them like ribbon, binding not their bodies, but their hearts. He pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against hers. "I'll follow you, Josefina," he whispered, "wherever you go." She smiled through tears. "You better bring your spice game." He chuckled. "I've learned from the best." The airport was quiet, too quiet. Josefina sat by gate 36 with a paper cup of green tea growing colder in her hand, the overhead speakers muttering flight updates in 3 languages she could barely hear. Her boarding pass lay limp in her lap. A wait, a permission, a maybe. Shanghai buzzed in the distance behind her, but the city already felt like a dream, like something she'd survived, and something she wasn't ready to wake up from. He met her there, at the terminal entrance, 2 hours earlier. No entourage, no suit. Just a man in a navy sweater, hair windswept, holding a single umbrella and a brown paper bag. She hadn't expected him to come, and yet she had. "We could stay in this limbo a little longer," he said quietly, walking beside her through the atrium. Josefina gave a soft, tired smile. Limbo's still a cage, Wei, even if the view is nice. He looked at her, eyes dark and still filled with so many unsaid things. "I know this isn't enough yet," he murmured, "that you still need time." "I need to hear myself again," she said, "without your name echoing in every corner." He nodded. There was no fight in him, only respect and longing. At the gate, she turned to him. He didn't ask her to stay. He didn't fall to his knees. He just held her, strong, steady, with a kind of reverence she'd never felt from anyone before. As if letting her go was the bravest way he could say, "I love you." She whispered against his chest, "Don't wait for me." "I won't wait," he said. "I'll be ready. There's a difference." Then, softly, "Come back when it's your choice." She didn't find the note until the plane was halfway across the Pacific. It was tucked inside the paper bag he'd handed her earlier. A tiny rice cracker bag from her favorite street stall and a folded slip of hotel stationery. His handwriting was elegant, firm. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. It read, "If you ever feel alone, find me where winter ends. Wei." She closed her eyes, pressed the note to her chest, and cried for everything that was almost, everything that still could be. The cafe wasn't perfect. The tiles were cracked in one corner. The wooden sign out front hung slightly crooked, and sometimes the power flickered when it rained too hard. But every morning, when Josefina unlocked the front door and stepped into the scent of toasted spices, warm bread, and homegrown herbs, she felt like she could finally breathe again. Maison Delphine, named after her grandmother, painted by hand in faded teal over sun-bleached wood. It wasn't a hotel. It wasn't Shanghai. But it was hers. Inside the cafe, children gathered every Saturday for cooking lessons. Some barefoot, some shy, some loud and full of questions. Josefina tied her red apron around her waist and told them stories while they chopped onions and rolled dumplings. "See this scar on my hand?" she told one boy once. "Got that burning sugar in Paris, but I kept cooking." "Why?" the girl beside him had asked. Josefina smiled. "Because love needs to be fed, and sometimes feeding others is the only way we remember how to feed ourselves." Every dish she served at Maison Delphine told a story. Coconut miso noodles, curry glazed bao buns, jerk scallion rice balls, food that tasted like the places she'd been and the places she still dreamed of. Wei's note never left her. She didn't frame it. She didn't tuck it into some drawer. She carried it in her wallet, creased, worn, still faintly smelling like cinnamon and regret. Find me where winter ends. Some nights, when the cafe was closed and the world was still, she would hold it to her chest and whisper, "Not yet, but maybe soon." It was an ordinary Tuesday when he arrived. She didn't see him at first. She was behind the counter showing one of the local teens how to layer cocoa butter into pastry dough. But then she looked up, drawn by a silence that wasn't empty, but full. And there he was, in the back of the cafe, plain black button down, sleeves rolled, hair longer, eyes softer. He didn't speak, didn't wave. He just watched, like a man who had crossed an ocean not to be seen, but to witness. She stared for a long moment. The room faded, the kids' voices muffled. The cafe fell away. He was still Wei, still winter in his gaze. But this time, she saw the thaw. He nodded, once. She didn't run to him. She didn't crumble. She simply smiled, a slow, knowing smile, like a woman who had finally come home to herself. And now, could choose him with both hands open. The sea whispered as it always did, steady, patient, like it had been waiting for this moment, just as long as they had. The sun was setting outside Maison Delphine, casting golden fire over the windows, soft shadows curling across the kitchen walls. The cafe was closed. The sign flipped to resting. And for once, the space wasn't filled with chatter, or the laughter of children, or the crackle of hot oil. Only silence, and him. Liang Wei stood by the prep counter, sleeves rolled, a single wooden spoon in his hand, as if he'd been holding it for far longer than just tonight. The apron around his waist was borrowed, paint-stained and flour-smudged, but his eyes were clear, and his heart was open. Josefina didn't say anything at first. She watched him from the doorway, arms folded, curls pulled back loosely. "You look uncomfortable," she said gently. He smiled, only slightly. "That's because I am." She chuckled. "Good. You're not supposed to run an empire in an apron." "I'm not here to run anything," he said, voice softer now. "Just to learn what it feels like to build something. Together." They began cooking, quietly, naturally. Hands moving around each other like music, like memory. She rolled dumplings while he chopped scallions. She sang an old Creole lullaby under her breath while he stirred a pot of coconut garlic sauce, following her whispered instructions. No contracts, no boardrooms, no expectations, just them. Two souls meeting again in the place they were always meant to stand, side by side. Finally, Wei set the spoon down. He turned to her, and without ceremony, without rehearsed poetry, he said, "I don't want to run my empire without you beside me." Josefina blinked, hands still. He went on, "Not because you make me stronger, not because you make me softer, but because, with you, I don't feel like I'm pretending anymore." He took a slow step toward her. "I don't want a world where I'm just surviving. I want one where we're both breathing." He held out his hand, gently, openly. "I'm not asking you to forgive everything, just to let me start fresh, in your world, with your rules." She looked at him, the man who once stood in his own silence like armor, now willing to come barefoot into her garden. She reached out and placed her flour-dusted hand into his. "You don't belong in my world," she whispered. His eyes flickered, a shadow of hurt. But then she smiled, because it was never mine alone. She took a deep breath. "Love shouldn't ask anyone to shrink, Wei. So if we're doing this, You're not bringing your name, and I'm not bringing my fire. We're bringing us, whole, messy, real. She squeezed his hand. Now stir that pot before it burns. Later that night, they ate on the back patio under hanging string lights and Caribbean stars. No press, no shareholders, just a wooden table between them and 2 bowls of something warm. Wei took a bite and grinned. This tastes like rebellion. Josefina laughed. That's the tamarind. I always add a little extra when I'm in love. He looked at her, long and quiet and reverent, and said without fear this time, Then I hope it burns forever. The sun bowed low over the horizon, kissing the sea in ripples of gold and crimson. On a quiet stretch of Caribbean sand, beneath a driftwood arch adorned with red silk and seagrass, Josefina stood barefoot, curls blowing gently in the ocean breeze. Her gown wasn't traditional. It was made of soft ivory linen, woven with gold-threaded accents that shimmered like sunlit honey. At her waist, a red sash, her grandmother's scarf, repurposed, a memory tied in love. She held no bouquet, just her heart and his. Liang Wei stood across from her in a collarless cream suit, no tie, no pretense. His eyes were steady, misted just enough for her to know this was real. There was no podium, no officiant in robes, just friends, family, the sea. Tables in the sand held baskets of coconut bread, fried dumplings, red bean buns, and pitchers of red hibiscus tea. Lanterns strung between palm trees glowed as dusk wrapped them in warmth. Children giggled, elders hummed old songs, and love danced in the air like spice. When Wei took Josefina's hands, he didn't just hold them, he anchored himself. And when he spoke, his voice trembled like wind through bamboo. I built empires out of pain and silence, but they never fed me. You taught me flavor. You made life rise again, not just for me, but in me. Josefina smiled, tears catching in the corners of her eyes. I didn't come here to fix you, Wei, she whispered. I came because you saw me and didn't ask me to shrink. To everyone's surprise, Liang Rui arrived just before the vows, holding their mother's old prayer beads. Behind her, Liang Han and Meilin, not dressed in power, but in humility. They didn't interrupt. They didn't command the moment. They simply stood at the edge of the gathering, watching, learning, letting go. Wei turned to them as the ceremony ended. He bowed, and Liang Han bowed back. Sometimes, healing doesn't need words, just witness. As night fell, Josefina and Wei danced slowly to the sound of waves and steel drums, their foreheads touching, their smiles soft, no choreography, no need. He kissed her shoulder. She kissed his cheek. They laughed, once, quietly, at the impossibility of how far they'd come. Later, they sat side by side on a worn wooden bench overlooking the sea, her head on his shoulder, his fingers tracing soft circles along her wrist. The lanterns behind them flickered like a constellation made just for them. The sky was brushed in fire and lavender. I used to think love would save me, she said quietly. I used to think love would break me, he replied. They turned to each other, and together they whispered, but it didn't. We rescued ourselves and then found each other. 1 year later. It was early morning on the island. The sea breathed softly against the shore, brushing the sand like a mother's lullaby. Birds sang through banana leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a kettle whistled over a gas flame. Inside Maison Delphine, the cafe smelled like cinnamon, roasted plantains, and jasmine tea. The sign out front read, "Closed today. We're resting, loving, and laughing." Josefina stood barefoot in the kitchen, hair tied up with a green scarf. wearing Way's oversized shirt over shorts that barely showed beneath the hem. Her hands moved with practiced ease, flipping cassava pancakes, slicing mangoes, whisking vanilla cream. Behind her, Way leaned against the doorframe in soft linen pants and sleepy eyes. "You're up early," he murmured. She turned, smiled. "The kitchen wanted me." He walked over, pressed a kiss to her temple. "The kitchen's greedy." "So are you," Way grinned, unapologetically. The back of the cafe had been expanded into a living space filled with books, vinyl records, open windows, and plants growing from repurposed flower tins. Photos lined the wall, Josefina with the kids from her cooking classes, Way holding a tray of dumplings like a proud, reluctant student. Grandma Delphine's portrait, smiling above the spice shelf like a quiet guardian. And next to that, a photo from their wedding. Lanterns, bare feet, laughter, joy that still pulsed off the page. As they sat on the back porch eating breakfast, Josefina leaned her head on his shoulder. "I've been thinking," she said. "Dangerous." She laughed. "Maybe. But what if we opened a second cafe?" Way raised a brow. "Another empire?" "No," she said, squeezing his hand. "Another table." He nodded slowly. "Anywhere you want." She looked up at him, her eyes soft. "Even Shanghai?" He paused, just briefly, then, "Especially Shanghai, but only if we serve coconut bread with dumplings." She grinned. "Deal." A small girl from the village ran up the garden path with a mango in her hands, waving at Josefina through the fence. Josefina waved back. "That's Samira. She started cooking with me last week." Way smiled. "Is she the one who added cinnamon to the miso soup?" "That's the one." "She's going places." They sat quietly for a long while, watching the waves roll in. Josefina rested her palm on Way's chest, right over his heart. "You feel warmer," she whispered. He turned his head, kissed her fingers. "That's because winter ended the moment you said yes. Love didn't rescue us. We rescued ourselves and then chose each other. Again and again and again." The end.